welcome to committee. Tax committee will come to order, please. First item of business will be bill introductions. Do we have any requests for bill introductions? Yes. Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Travis Lowe of Braden, Heidner, Lowe & Associates, here today on behalf of T-Mobile. And we'd respectfully request the introduction of a bill that would provide for the extension of the net operating loss carry forward from 10 to 20 years. This is a similar bill to the one passed out of committee last year. The RS number is 0796. That's 0796. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Committee, any questions? Any objection to the request? Seeing none, the request is approved. Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Any other requests for bill introductions? Seeing none in the room and none online, we will close that portion of the business and move on to our first hearing for the day. It's House Bill 2023. And I would first turn to the reviser for an overview of the bill, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I hit the wrong button. House Bill, you said 2023, right?
Yes, we will start with 2023, please.
Okay, very good, sorry. House Bill 2023 would amend how land devoted to agriculture is valued. Commencing in what would be tax year 2023, commodity prices, crop yields, and crop mix, when they're determining the valuation, they'd only use those items based on data for the current calendar year. The bill also provides that the Director of Property Valuation shall not use the methodology, which is commonly referred to as the moving averages, calculating a multi-year average for these commodity prices, crop yields, and crop mixes. Lastly, the bill directs the Director to continue to use the 8 calendar year averages of landlord net income for purposes of valuing land devoted to agriculture. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siebers. Committee, any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you again, Adam. We do have a fiscal note on House Bill 2023 that I will draw your attention to. Does anyone from the Department of Revenue want to comment on the fiscal note? It does state that there's no fiscal impact on Department of Revenue, but we would value your opinion if there's anything that needs to be clarified. Seeing none, we will continue on to our first proponent. I'd like to welcome to committee at the podium, Representative Ron Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for allowing me this time before you today. I come as a proponent for House Bill 2023. Many of us living in the rural areas have heard for years complaints from the landowners, the landlords, and also following that, we're hearing complaints from the county commissioners, and all of it centering around property tax. And so I went to the head of the department over at the Agriculture Economics Department at Kansas State, Dr. Alan Featherstone. And so I worked with him for a couple of years to try to determine why this was happening, why are there so many complaints. And it turns out it's this 8-year rolling average, which is actually a 16-year average plus 2. It's very complicated. I don't want to hopefully I won't get down into the weeds on this, but so for the landlord's net income, it is calculated over a 16-year period, which results in, if they have great years, those great years is spread out. And then if they have some really bad years, like they did in 14, 15, and 16, then they're paying really high taxes. Of course, the counties are happy during that period, but eventually that comes down several years later, 5 to 6 years later. And at that point, the counties, their income goes down. So for a budgeting process, both for the farmer, the landowner, and for the counties, this has become a problem. Now, this problem is not going to go away. There was a stability within the system when the farmers sold these goods locally and within the U.S. Those days are gone. They are all competing on the international market now, and it's very fluctuating, and that's not going to go away. So with Featherstone, we worked. I asked him to look at other ways to do this calculation, and we looked at a 5-year rolling average, which becomes a 10, or a straight 8-year average, and then he added one more, the 8-year plus he added in the yield, which makes it very complicated, and I do not wish to explain that. Because it was 8 years is in everybody's head when it comes to calculating all this, I left it at the 8-year. If you looked at the graphs within my testimony, you see that the yearly yields and what is actually going on the farm it's a very up and down situation. So we need to smooth that out somewhat. But the 8-year straight average does that adequately. And everybody I've showed it to is happy with, they think that they can live with that. And it's a better reflection for them and helps them do better budgeting both for the good times and the bad times if it's spread out over 8 years instead of a 16 plus 2. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Representative Highland. I have a first question on the graphs. The information that I had printed out doesn't have color on those lines. Could you help describe which line is which when we're looking at those numbers? I imagine your original charts had color on them.
Oh, they do. They're pretty.
I'm sure they're pretty.
If you look at figure number 7, is that the one you're looking at?
Yes, 7, 8, and 9.
Okay, figure number 7. The squiggly line, the up and down line, that is the individual years in the calculations. The middle line, the one that is a fairly smooth curve, that is the 5-year rolling or moving average. And the bottom line, which goes up steadily over the years, that is the 8-year rolling average. On figure 8, in the middle is the 8-year simple average, which is very similar to the one above, the 5-year rolling. And then on the next page, the middle line is a 8-year average with the yield calculation within it. And I did not feel we wanted to complicate this picture to that extent. So the 8-year was selected, and that's been the genesis for the bill to try to help out both the landowner and the county commissions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Day.
So just to clarify, the figure 9 is the one that you would be looking at, or figure 8?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Figure 8 says the 8-year moving average process, right? Let's see.
Figure 8, the 8-year moving average is the bottom one that comes down, slide in, and steadily goes up. That's the moving average.
Okay.
And the one in the middle that's this general slope up and back, that's the 8-year simple average.
Right. Okay. So is figure 8 the one that the bill is based on? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So lots of lines there. Explain the cap rate and where that is today, because I see that's part of the formula listed right there at the top.
That is part of the formula, and that is something that we are going to avoid conversing about. But the cap rate is based on the capitalization rate, the amount of money, the worth of money and so forth. It's actually outdated.
It's your rate of return, as I recall?
Right.
Okay.
But I've talked to the PDP people, and they say that's archaic in today's world. The numbers here that they are using, they should probably be looked at, but we do not want to touch that. That's the third rail.
So with that statement, maybe we don't want to look at any of this. I don't know. That cap rate's an elephant, but we don't want to look. And I'm afraid if we start down this path, that elephant may be a problem. Yeah.
That is a worry of,
My cap rate on real estate is about 4% right now. And I think your cap rate on that is 14, 15? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
it's, a lot of folks are worried about the cap rate and all that calculation there. And I am too. If that ever comes into the conversation, I will most likely pull this bill from consideration.
So, and I guess in layman's term, to explain capitalization rate, that is your rate of return. That's your interest rate. So 4 and 5% on real estate right now with the interest rates where they are is kind of what everybody's getting. And this was set in 1988, and I don't think they ever really adjusted it. They were supposed to do it annually, then for some reason it didn't get adjusted. Nobody ever thought interest rates would come down. And anyhow, that's to get it in layman's term, cap rate is interest rate. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Committee, any further questions? Representative Corbett.
So for the average farmer or landowner, in just dollars and cents, can you kind of show me how this might be better for landowners than the way it is now?
Well, during those years when their returns were either negative or very low, and they were, and over 50% of the farms in the state were actually negative during the 15 and 16 years. And it was during those years they were paying the maximum property tax. So this would even that out, so to speak, to where they could deal with it more likely instead of giving up their farms, and farms were lost during this period.
So what you're trying to do, would it be more like in real time than a lagging time? The farmers would be paying more current to what it really is happening to them?
It's closer to real time. It's not real time because real time would become very cumbersome and potentially very harmful to some. So this smooths it out, but it compresses it to where it's more realistic in the real world.
If I could just make a follow-up statement on that. There is a delay because the data that they use for this, there's a delay in collecting all this data and processing that. Could you speak a little bit to that delay? I didn't know if in your conversations with Dr. Featherstone if that was addressed.
Well, when it comes to evaluating the net income and so forth, there's a department over at K-State, and every parcel of land in our state is evaluated for soil type and everything else, and that is calculated into the yields. That's the delay. Those numbers are all given down to the counties, and so there is that big delay in getting that all calculated, and to the point where then they do the net income calculation. Is that what you're speaking of?
Yeah, I was thinking, is it about a 2-year delay between what actually happens and when that hits the tax valuation?
That's the reason I've always said it's a 16 plus 2.
Exactly. Okay. Just one other question. When you talk about landlord net income, as a farmer and a rancher, I realize that some years you don't make it very well. That's why you buy insurance, and that's why you have some disaster payments occasionally from the government. Are any of those payments figured into landlord net income?
Part of their expense, is it not? Tell me, you're the one doing the calculation.
The formula is way past me. So.
Well, that's part of your expense. So yes, it would be calculated in there.
Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative, for your presentation. Do you know of currently the appraisal system is based on soil type? And I'll give you a personal example. I bought a 40-acre tract right across from me that has about 18 acres of mason soil and in Montgomery County, that's some of the top producing soils. And the rest of it is not so, it's kind of evolves into a hill. It's along a creek. And Production-wise, there's no provision because that creek has got over so many times and prior management techniques allowed a lot of that prime soil to be washed away. So really, in reality, it's not productive anymore. It's certainly not topsoil. It's still classified as mason, even though it's probably not as good. And I went to the county appraiser and kind of appealed that and explained to that situation and basically run into a brick wall. And they won't vary from that NRCS, Natural Resource and Conservation Original Classification of Soil Types. So there's a lot of disparity issues out there that's causing a lot of people to get upset, and I've had complaints from a couple constituents about that very same thing. You have any idea how to address that, or is that worthwhile addressing in the appraisal system? Thank you.
That's beyond the scope of my bill, but I do understand I've had the same complaints. In fact, I have aerial photographs of areas that was used to dump concrete on lands, wastelands, but it's being calculated under the good soil type, and they're paying property tax on it as part of that acreage. So that's something that we maybe need to look at in the future to even out the system. It's complicated.
Representative Highland, with your permission, I do see that we have Roger Ham online. Do you want him to address that question?
If he would like to, jump in, please.
Okay. Roger, are you available? Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Did you hear Representative Blex's question?
Yes, we're talking about a particular soil type that seems to be troublesome. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. We do have an agreement with NRCS. They can go to the county appraiser, and they have a way of appealing some of those soil types that may be troublesome to the NRCS. And so there is a mechanism for those kinds of things to take place if they will go through the right channels. So we've got that kind of established, an agreement with them, and have been doing that for a number of years. So I think we can work something out if we know about how to help someone out in this particular area. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Ham. I appreciate that. Committee, are there any further questions for our proponent? Seeing none, Representative, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I do not show any further proponent testimony. Is there anyone wanting to appear as a proponent for House Bill 2023? Seeing none, we will move on to the opponent testimony. And I have John Donnelly with the Kansas Farm Bureau. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am John Donnelly, and I've been listening online all year, so I'm going to do my best to speak directly into the microphone because it's hard to hear online sometimes, just so you all know. I am John Donnelly. I'm with Divine, Donnelly, and Murray Governmental Affairs. I'm here today on behalf of the Kansas Farm Bureau. You're going to hear very similar testimony to what you just heard from the proponent coming from the opponent. I'm in the odd situation and likely the only person this year that you will hear from that is going to come and oppose a bill that would likely decrease the property taxes on my members for the next 5 to 8 years. I'll just say that up front. And I think the Representative Highland just did a good job of explaining that. However, I will say if you need to see the entire ag manager study there from Dr. Featherstone, there's a link on my testimony, and I don't know, Representative Highland may have actually submitted that with his. But I'm going to base a lot of that off this. In that study, it shows about an 8 to 10 year result of what would happen going from the 8 year straight, or from the 8 year moving average to the 8 year straight. What you'll see on that actually is, part of the impetus for this bill was rising property tax valuations for ag land. And actually, if we would have had the 8 years straight during those years, we would have actually had higher valuations during the past 8 years, as you'll see. Admittedly, as I opened my testimony, we're kind of at an apex now where that changes. And barring any unforeseen changes in the agricultural commodity prices, et cetera, the next 5 to 8 years, I would predict will actually, the 8 years straight, will be lower valuations than the moving average. So that's why I say I'm actually here opposing a property tax decrease for our members. However, what we're really faced with here is a policy decision. This is pure tax policy, and reasonable minds can differ. As I have presented this information to the Kansas Farm Bureau Board in trying to analyze how we wanted to approach this bill within our policy, our policy is supportive of the use value formula as it is today, but we're open to ideas of improving it. I think at the end of the day, this is actually kind of a zero-sum game. 8 years straight, what you'll see is you'll actually see, it will be more responsive, as the representative said. It will be more responsive to current market conditions, but it won't be totally responsive, which is exactly what, as he just testified. And if you look at page, there's a chart in my testimony that shows the 2-year lag in data. It's very simple, and just so everyone knows, the charts on my created futuristic valuations is all stuff that I just basically made up because you can't predict the future. I threw in numbers in there, good years, bad years, et cetera. But what this chart shows is this is where the problem is, and this, not the problem, this is where we have the challenge of not being able to match up with the good years being the high tax years as well. In order to have good data to put into the use value formula, you have to assemble that data. That data is assembled by Kansas State University, Kansas Ag Statistics, et cetera, and it takes about 2 years to get that. So we have an automatic 2-year lag in all of the data that we use in the use value formula. The next page that you'll see on there, and once again, this is my futuristic data, but it shows the story. The blue line on there, I hope it came through in color. If it didn't, I apologize.
Well, we don't have any color printers in the building, so the electronic version is in color if you're looking at it on your computer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The blue line, the one with the big jags, that's my made-up numbers. That's just what I plugged into my Excel spreadsheet as to what the landlord's net income would be. The gray line, or the middle one, I would say in year 2040, 2041, there's a little peak there, just for you, those of you looking at it in black and white. That shows what the 8 straight under the bill would do. The yellow line, the one that rolls, that's why I call it a rolling average instead of moving average, that is what the 8-year moving average would do. So that just is a visual to show you what would happen. And the only reason I did that is because Dr. Featherstone's report shows about an 8 to 10 year frame. This, when you put 15 years of data in, it takes 40 years, 50 years to truly understand what the ramifications of that is. I called this a zero-sum game. At the end of the day, statistically, if you look at all that, it all ends up in a wash anyways. It's just a matter of when the taxes are paid. And I applaud the proponent of this bill. I think it's a great, he's trying to address a concern that I believe is out there, and I wholeheartedly agree. I just am not convinced that this is the proper approach to do it. I think there will be years we'll like it, there will be years we don't like it. I would predict in 8 years, we'll start hearing from people saying, well, we need to go back to that rolling average because that'll get our valuations lower. And I don't know that that's good tax policy in the long run if we're switching back and forth. The last page, I actually just threw this one in there just because I thought it was fun. It's got all sorts of options for you. I've got 5 years, 5 straight, 5 rolling, 15 straight, 15 rolling. But the point of it is, the more data that goes in the system, the more even that is. The less data that goes into the system, the more jagged it will be. So when I was talking to the Department of Revenue and showing them, I was very proud of my Excel spreadsheet, as you can tell. When I was talking to them, they really got freaked out because they can't believe that I was using data that I just made up. So they actually sent me last night, and I think you have been forwarded this. I went back in my files, and as you can tell, as windy as I am on this subject, I've been dealing with use value for about 20 years now. And I went back in my files and found the soil type that I had the most data from, I thought, and it's mere silt loam number 3261 in Clay County. It's actually one of the most prevalent soil types in Clay County. So I even sent them, when I first started this project, I sent PVD this information, and I was really proud of myself, and they said, well, no, that's not entirely accurate. So I asked them, well, can you improve on it? And they have done so. Roger, I thank you and your team for that. On that, you'll see these two charts. There's two charts that I've forwarded from what they've done. This is the actual data from 1998 to 2019. I think it should show up as the first page of the attachment that I sent. The orange line is the actual year-to-year data. Now, I must say that is the price and the crop mix. The yield data is actually confidential because they can't ensure, Ag Stats cannot ensure that we can't figure out who's got those yields, et cetera. So this isn't the entire picture, but it's as close as we could get. So that is the year-to-year data versus, and the blue line is the rolling average, or the moving average as I understand it. The next page shows what would have happened, and this goes to show kind of what I had said earlier. Over the past decade, we actually would have had higher valuations under the provisions of this bill. So all that to say, this is a great policy discussion. I'm enjoying it more than I should, and I appreciate us having this, and I can wax on as much as you'd like about the use value formula, but I want to summarize it as this. When I went to the board, what they prefer is the more level taxation, the fewer surprises we have, the fewer jags, the better. It's our belief that the rolling average or the moving average in consistent law provides that steady increases or decreases. Admittedly, we are going to see higher values for a longer period of time until we get some of those years from 2010 to 2012 out of the system. But we prefer that to having more volatility within the valuation. So with that, I will stand for questions, and I thank you for your indulgence.
Committee, any questions? Representative Gartner.
Thanks, John. I'm not an ag expert, which you are. Well, a lot more than I am, but I guess, you know, I've heard since I've been on tax committee for 4 years, 5 years, we've talked about ag land, good years, bad years, 8-year rolling average, 16 plus 2 and all this. And I'm just wondering, is this the best? Well, number one, first question is, other ag states, when they evaluate property, do they do something similar, or is it all over the map, or can you address that?
I have not looked at that recently, but I can tell you that there's a report from the late 90s, early 2000s, I think it's from the IAOO, I don't even know what that means, it's some appraisal group. And they basically say this is the gold standard. This is as good as we can get. There are most states, and I apologize, I should have had this on the tip of my tongue. Most states have moved to an income-based appraisal type process for ag land, but they all have not. Case in point, Nebraska does not. They actually value their ag land on fair market value, and talk to producers in Nebraska if you want to talk to people that don't like property taxes on ag land. There are good reasons, and Mr. Chairman, please stop me if you'd wish, but there are very good reasons that we have income-based appraisal on ag land. When I present to a group of farmers and ranchers on this topic, the first question I always ask is, how many of you purchased ag land in the last 20 years? Every hand goes up. The next question I ask, at the time you purchased that ag land, were you able to cash flow that in order to make those payments? And every hand in the room goes down. I don't know if it's because we're bad businessmen or what, but the income generated from ag land generally will not pay for it. So that's why we have use value appraisal and income-based appraisal. So to answer your question more directly, yes, I do believe we have the gold standard, and it's through Property Valuation Division. There's Roger Ham sitting here and makes me nervous because he's forgotten more than I know about use value appraisal. So he'll correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, John.
Representative Baker.
So thank you. Great presentation, and I've been on both sides of that fence. I've owned ag land and I've not owned ag land. I've owned commercial property, so whatever hat you want to wear. But I live in the Flint Hills, And we have a unique situation there. So how do we address that situation? We had a land sale the other day, 2,400 acres at, you know, a couple $3,000 an acre, and the property tax bill didn't really move the needle very much. So how do we fix that?
It depends if we need a fix. I guess I'll say that, but I see where you're coming from on that. What I will say about pasture land right now, actually, I don't know that it matters what we do from the 8 straight versus the 8-year moving average. Those valuations are going to go up, mainly because rental rates are also increasing. $30, there's other rates out there, I believe, but I think they will still trend up generally. To your bigger question, how that relates to the fair, what it's selling for on the auction block, I don't know that there is an answer to that. I don't know that there needs to be necessarily. The income producing capability of that land will likely not support those prices. So until investors, people that are willing to invest on that, are unwilling to bid that higher than the income producing capability, I think we're going to be faced with that problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to follow up. So it's a real problem in especially Chase County and Morris County, some of those counties. So they've talked about maybe doing different things, grazing tax, all kinds of things that are illegal, I'm sure. But somewhere there, we really do need to figure out something. I'm not sure what the answer is. I can't believe those rental rates are that cheap. I mean, why in the world would you ever buy that? So hopefully, and I challenge you and Representative Highland and everybody, we need to work on a solution.
I will say this, as a rancher that rents a lot of real estate, it's $30 is plenty high if you're going to try to make a living doing it. So it's a lot of it has to do with outside investment, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either. So it's a policy question we have to address, or we need to converse about. I don't know that we need to address it, but because I don't want to come up here and oppose your bill that you suggest is the fix. But
I hate to put Mr. Ham on the spot again, but Roger, do you have anything to add to Representative Baker's question?
As we think about the valuation of our grassland or any land in the state of Kansas, we have never been had any relationship to the market value, and you all know that. It's so important that we continue to keep those two things completely separated when we think about the market value, how it relates to ag use values, which there is no relationship whatsoever, and the fact that these rental rates that we are observing and the surveys that we are beginning to pull from those areas, we recognize and are continuing to increase those rental rates over the period of time that we're doing this analytical work. And so you're going to see those rental rates start to continue to push those grassland values up across the state of Kansas. We're seeing that currently right now.
Thank you for that, Roger. Committee, are there any further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Donnelly, thank you. I do not show any further opponent testimony. Is there anyone wanting to appear as an opponent on House Bill 2023? Seeing none, we will move on to neutral testimony. I have for in-person testimony, neutral, Dean Clare, Director of Stock Growers Division, Kansas Livestock Association. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. Like you said, my name is Dean Clare. I serve as the director of our Stock Growers Division at the Kansas Livestock Association. We represent a little over 5,700 livestock producers throughout the state. And the reason that we're neutral on this bill can basically be summarized in both the opponent and proponent testimony. This does create more volatility, but there is also some short-term benefits to ag valuations in this 8-year simple average. The current formula is, I like to simplify it as being a 8-year average of the 8-year average. And that system is designed to smooth volatility, variability from year to year. The simple average is designed to be more reflective of current market conditions. And rather than repeat everything that's been said, I'd encourage you to just flip over or scroll down if you're on your screen to slide that's out of Dr. Featherstone's presentation, similar to what's been shown before. And here we have 3 counties. The solid lines represent current valuations in the counties of Barton, Dickinson, and Rush County. That is under the current system of the moving average, the 8-year average of the 8-year average. The dotted line represents what those valuations would be should House Bill 2023 come into effect. What you can see there is that those property values are more reflective of current market conditions. The highs are higher, and as you can see, the lows are trending lower. But one issue that I'd like to point out is that 2-year lag. From 2016 to 2017, net farm income decreased in almost every portion of the state, including the portion that these counties are located in. And under House Bill 20, or under both scenarios, property valuations still increased, but under the dashed lines that represent an 8-year simple average, they actually increased even more because of that 2-year lag. Now you do see those lower 2 years later, but they are higher during that drop in net farm income. And so the reason that I'd like to basically just summarize we're neutral is we can see benefits in decreasing those valuations over the next couple years. But this is also just one portion of what property taxes are, the valuation. The other half of the portion is mill levies. And that's something that this statute does not touch, and that's a reason that property taxes are particularly staying at high levels as well. And so I'd like to just conclude that we will stay neutral, but this is also very important, as John had touched on, to the success of our industry, and any amendments that could put that in lieu of being successful, we will quickly turn into opposition.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you say that the proposal, if it were enacted, would make the process simpler?
I don't know if it would make any of the process simpler. The only thing that it changes would be the valuation that the property owner sees. I don't know if it would change any of the simplicity. There isn't a lot on their part that goes into determining what that equation is.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none. Dean, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, neutral appearing before the committee, I have Doug Smith testifying on behalf of Charles McKinney, Clark County Commissioner. Welcome to committee. I don't believe your microphone's on.
I'm Doug Smith. I'm here on behalf of Commissioner McKinney. He is president of Kansas Legislative Policy Group, which is an organization of county commissioners from 33 rural Kansas counties. We do agree that something needs to be done on the property tax burden. We support tax policy that is fair and equitable and provides stability and certainty to taxpayers as well as local government. After visiting with some county commissioners in our member counties, we've been told that this will not be a smooth transition and may create ongoing and unpredictable tax shifts between agriculture, commercial, and residential taxpayers, especially in counties with higher percentages of overall valuations. And attached to Mr. McKinney's testimony is a map that shows the valuation of ag land in counties in Kansas. Jewell County has 73% of their valuation is ag land. That would create an unprecedented shift if those ag values start dropping, and that would be falling on commercial and residential consumers.
We ask that you take into consideration as you debate this bill that there is not uniform distribution of ag values across Kansas, and that there are consequences, and that when you do deliberate, you take that into consideration on the tax shifts that may occur. And I'd stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Committee, I would also like to call your attention to neutral written testimony from Jay Hall, representing the Kansas Association of Counties, and Josh Rowe, representing the Kansas Corn Growers Association. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as neutral testimony on House Bill 2023? Seeing none, we will close the hearing for House Bill 2023 and move right along to the hearing for House Bill 2105. And I would turn to the reviser for a brief overview of 2105, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2105, would establish withholding requirements for certain employees who work inside or work in Kansas and multiple states. Currently, I believe there's about a 1-day safe harbor provision for employees who are not residents of Kansas who work in the state. The bill would extend out to 30 days before withholding would be required. That would, of course, only apply to individuals who are not state residents. And pursuant to the definition of an employee, there would be an exception. So these categories of employees would not qualify for the 30-day provision. These would be professional athletes, professional entertainers, qualified production employees, or certain public figures. So that the withholding 30-day provision would not apply to them. Additionally, an employee is considered present and performing employment duties within the state if the employee performs more of the employee's duties within such state than in any other state. Also, if a resident employee performs employment duties in one other state during the day, the employee shall be considered to have performed more of the employment duties in the non-resident state. Transit shall not be considered in determining the location of the performance of duties. Also, employers may rely on the employee's determination of time in these states, or the time and attendance system when determining the location of the employee. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Committee, any questions? Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam, does that include, in light of the pandemic and all of the remote work, does it address remote work if I'm working in Kansas, but I'm doing that for my home in Missouri, but being paid by a Kansas company?
Quite honestly, this is a bill that was filed last year before the pandemic, so this is it's probably timely. It doesn't exactly it's not due to the pandemic because it's the provisions are matched. I may probably defer to the proponents to explain a little bit more or to give a little more input on that. Residents, as I stated before, would not qualify. So anyone who's a resident of the state, they would still have to do withholding. So if the location, I either have to look into that a little bit more if they're not able to answer that question. Representative, sorry about that.
Mr. Siebers, we need to pause for just a minute. We received a text message that our audio may not be working. I wanted to not be in violation of any open meetings. So I don't know if we can clarify if the revisor's office or research, I'm sure everybody that's on WebEx, I believe, can hear. Can anybody pull up YouTube? Oh, we just got a message. It is working. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that before we moved on. Is there any other questions for the reviser? Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam, I'm looking at 2105, correct? And Is this all new legislation, or what are you actually changing in the bill?
Representative, that's correct. These are, when language is completely new, it is always a little different and difficult. It always just appears as normal text. Since these are all new sections, it doesn't even say the word new next to like the section. So these are entirely new sections. All the language will be brand new. None of it currently exists in Kansas statutes.
Okay, you've answered my question. Thank you.
Very good. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none in the room and no hands virtually. Thank you for your summary. Committee, I would like to call your attention to a fiscal note of a whopping $600 that appears from Director of Budget. Is there any questions on the fiscal note? Seeing none, we will move into proponent testimony. I'd like to welcome to committee our first proponent, Kent Eccles with the Kansas Chamber. Welcome to committee.
Working? Good. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Ken Eccles, here today on behalf of the Kansas Chamber. I appreciate the opportunity to be here in support of House Bill 2105. I will try to be brief and I'll try to answer your question, Representative. This is certainly a lot less complicated than the previous bill that you heard. All this bill does is it increases, as the reviser said, and I'll try not to repeat everything he said, but it just increases the one-day safe harbor for employees in Kansas so their employers don't have to withhold income. When they work in Kansas, it increases it from 1 to 30 days. So why do we want to do this? You heard me here a couple weeks ago on a Council of State Taxation recommendation that you passed out favorably yesterday. That was 2106, and we appreciate that. This is another one of their recommendations. There's been legislation at the federal level for as long as I can remember dealing with remote workforce, and it's just not moved forward. So the idea, the Council of State Taxation in 2019 started saying, hey, we should get states to start looking at this because there's a lot of people, particularly where I live in Johnson County, that work in Johnson, or they're companies in Johnson County, but they work or they live in Missouri. So they're trying to figure out who needs to be withholding taxes in those counties. And now with the pandemic, it's not just on border counties. It's, you know, you're working remote, you're traveling not as much, and it's across the United States. So you should have in your packet testimony from KS, from Fred Nicely on this bill. They go into a lot of the nuts and bolts of it. So again, they started pushing this in 2019. Illinois is the closest state to us that adopted it last year. And you know, you can look around in this room today and you can see the changes that the pandemic's had on remote workforce. So currently, the way it works in Kansas and most other states is that if an out-of-state employee works one full day in the state of Kansas, they are legally obligated to file an income tax return in the state and have their employer withhold taxes for their income to pay that. We think that's an onerous burden for employers and employees to have to comply with. So the idea is, and I will say that Governor Kelly recognizes that that's an onerous burden too. Last week, she introduced Executive Order 21-01, which will allow Kansas employers to continue to withhold income taxes based on the employee's primary work location. So if they're from Kansas, then Kansas withholds their income taxes, and that'll help ease some of the burden during this pandemic. And I'll also say the Chamber has some members, some companies that are on the border, and like I mentioned earlier, they're headquartered in, let's say, Johnson County, but a lot of their employees are from Missouri. So they're trying to work out between the states to do this. A neat thing about this bill, and it's towards the end of the bill, there's a reciprocity provision. So that'll offer this extension. So let's say I'm a Missourian and I work in Kansas City, Kansas. I come across the state line. Well, I can only get that 30-day safe harbor provision. If Missouri also has a similar provision, which they do not now, but the idea behind this is that if we would pass this 30-day safe harbor provision, other states would say, hey, we need to do that. That'll lessen the compliance burden on employees and employers. So that's the reciprocity provision that's in there. So again, much simpler bill than the one you heard earlier, but I'll stop there and try to take questions best I can.
Thank you, Mr. Eccles. I guess that was my first question I thought of is, what is our comparison to our other neighboring states? I imagine it's mostly Missouri when you think about workforce, but also into Oklahoma, Nebraska.
Colorado and Nebraska. There are certainly examples there. Now, you know, I've worked in different states and across state lines and don't recall doing that, but it just moves the one-day safe harbor to 30 days. And the reciprocity piece, if Kansas were to pass this, I would, because Illinois already has, and I don't know how many employees go back and forth between Illinois and Kansas, but I'm sure there are some. It would be an incentive for our surrounding states to do the same.
Committee, any questions? Representative Day and then Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a specific situation right now that I'm dealing with that is a trucker who is based out of Abilene, Kansas, and lives in Missouri. How would it impact something like that where the company that he works for is always, you know, in the same place, but he moves from place to place? Where would the income taxes get paid to? And also, just as a side note, unemployment insurance has been a nightmare. We don't know where for him to apply.
That's a good question. So he lives in Missouri, but he's legally obligated to file income taxes in Kansas.
Okay, so and so that's the case. Same thing. I used to work in Illinois but live in California. Pretty sure it was.
Illinois has passed the law, so maybe California will get on board with that as well, and then we can do that.
Okay.
That's the idea.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I lived in Johnson County, there were several employees of the Bear plant over in Missouri lived over in Kansas, and their salaries had to be augmented. Can you explain that?
Well, there's a thing called the earnings tax, and that's a separate deal, but that's in Kansas City, Missouri has a 1% earnings tax. So if I live in Johnson County or Kansas City, Kansas, or Leavenworth, and I go to downtown Kansas City or the plaza to work, I have to pay 1% of my salary to the state of Missouri in an earnings tax. So Kansas-based companies will say, well, yeah, that's a hit, so we will pay you more to make up for it.
Thank you.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. Is that 1% state or city? That's a city earnings tax. I thought you said state, but it's city.
Did I say state? I'm sorry.
We were thinking about doing that in our town too, just to kind of help raise revenue, especially on all those ball players that come to town.
Yeah, they've had that on the books in Kansas City, Missouri. It's a state, or it's a city tax.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize if maybe this is already on the books, but if you're in Kansas City and you're like a service provider for, let's say, a plumber or electrician, and you're bouncing back and forth between Kansas and Missouri, obviously you're probably withholding tax depending where your employees are, but does the employee have to worry about if they're in Kansas or Missouri, or is that just where their office is headquartered?
I think it's where their office is headquartered.
Okay.
I mean, because for example, I live in Olathe, and I hire a heating and cooling company to come. They're based in Missouri, but they come over to Kansas. They do work on my HVAC for 2 hours and go back. I don't think that dings that employee for being in.
So if you're a private contractor, you just have to keep track of it at that point.
Yeah. Okay. That's my understanding.
Committee, any further questions? Seeing none in the room and none online, thank you for your testimony, sir.
Thank you.
Committee, I do not show any other written or oral testimony in proponents. Is there anyone else wishing to appear in favor of House Bill 2105? Seeing none, we will close that portion of the hearing. I do not have any written or oral neutral or opponent testimony. Is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent to House Bill 2105? Anyone wanting to appear neutral on 2105? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2105. Committee, I will remind you, tomorrow, committee has been canceled. We were planning on working a bill. There is some potential weather that is going to be coming in. A few representatives were wanting to join virtually from home. We aren't going to be able to work a bill and vote from home, so we just postponed that until Monday. So that is the situation there. So there will be no House Tax Committee meeting tomorrow. Snow days. Is there anything else that needs to come before the committee? If not, we are adjourned.